Welcome to the D Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the D Shift podcast. And I am really excited to have a chance to speak with an attorney today. Sandra Fava is a skilled litigator and negotiator. She also supports or encourages her clients to use ADR, alternative dispute resolution methods, such as mediation, to attempt to resolve the issues that get complicated and complex during the divorce process. Offers client-focused services that really offer her clients transparency, communication, and the tools and strategies needed to obtain the best possible outcome throughout the divorce. And I think there's going to be so many questions and so many conversations that we can have, Sandra, around this to really maybe expand people's understanding and knowledge. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Mardi. I'm excited to be here.
Well, and I'm really excited because it's so nice to have an attorney on the call. So I want to say this right up front, as I try to do with any of the professionals who have licenses and are potentially going to be talking about areas that are going to impact somebody in divorce. This podcast is not designed to provide any specific legal information that's relevant to your case, and there's no kind of client attorney relationship established just because you listen to this podcast. So with that legalese being out of the way, Sandra, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into this area of law, because I know a lot of attorneys do not ever want to have to do family law. So tell us a little bit about your story.
That's very true. I can tell you've spoken with a lot of attorneys in your time. So, as you mentioned, I am the founding partner of Fava Law here in Morristown, New Jersey. We actually only recently opened our doors in September of 2024. After 20 plus years in big law, I had been a partner at a national law firm, and then a brief stint in a more New Jersey but large, well-known law firm. I decided that it was time for me to foray into my own venture because I wanted to provide clients with a different level of service that my prior firm, as it was continuing to grow, just couldn't do anymore. And I got into the field of family law, and I'll try to be as quick as this. So I'm first generation person in this country. My parents were born in Italy and immigrated here as adults. And I am a surprise baby, so I have two siblings who are significantly older than me. And neither of them wanted or had the desire to attend school after high school. So I'm the first in my family to go to college and then on to law school. And I really became interested in the law as a young child. I loved, if any of you remember, The People's Court with Judge Wapner. It was one of my favorite TV shows, so much so that if I was misbehaved, the punishment would be that I couldn't watch it for the afternoon. And that kind of sparked my interest. And then, kind of as I got older and grew up, then it became Ally McBeal, and I took some courses in school. But in my middle school years, I had a family member who went through a very, very difficult divorce. And I saw how it kind of shattered everyone around, even tangentially involved, both emotionally and financially. And so I continued wanting to pursue a career in the law, but said I was never going to do family law because of that. Well, fast forward, I'm in law school, and I decide my second year that I need some credits, so I take a family law class because it happened to fit in well with my schedule. And my professor, who then ran the family law clinic at my law school, said, "You seem to really get this. Maybe you should do the clinic and you'll get more credits." So I did that and worked on an international child abduction case. And then the firm that I worked at my first summer was a large firm that did not do family law, but the partner who was supervising me got assigned a pro bono domestic violence case. And I was working on a mass tort diet drug litigation. And I found that to be incredibly boring. So when he came to me and said, I want nothing to do with this case, figure it out, let me know where I have to be, I was thrilled. And I actually had human interaction and, kind of got to see that firsthand. So it was kind of these little, I call them like drips, like of the universe sending me signals that, even though I said I would never, you never say never sort of thing. And then my second summer, I worked part-time at a small law firm that didn't do family law, but then I did an internship with a family law judge who then offered me the job as his law clerk when I finished law school. And so, as much as I try to explore my options and not do it, I just kept getting drawn back into it. And so it's all I've ever practiced. I've exclusively focused on family law since that clerkship, actually. And it is a difficult area of law to practice, for sure. And I understand why there are attorneys who say they don't want to do it. But to me, I also find it super personally rewarding. Number one, I think people don't really appreciate the nuances in family law from an emotional and a legal perspective. As a family law attorney, I have to know a little bit about criminal law. I have to know a little bit about tax law. I have to know a little bit about bankruptcy law. Sometimes I have to know a bit about corporate law. I also have to have some sort of psychology training, you have to have a bedside manner if such a thing exists in law, because you're dealing with people who are generally, not in a good space. So, if you're not sensitive to that emotional aspect of it, I find that you can't really help somebody.
Yeah.
And the reward is that you see somebody come in and they may not be who they once were, but hopefully by the end of it, they've transitioned, into someone even better. It's like the butterfly, the cocoon whole thing. And they're grateful that you were able to, help them be a voice of reason or guide them through, what can be a very difficult process.
Absolutely. And I think that you touched on several really important things, but one thing I would like to just kind of open up the questioning with, because you mentioned it, is what's the difference? Because I hear this all the time. Well, I pick the biggest law firm because they have 50 attorneys. Like, it's pretty impressive when you go on some of these huge, even family law firms, and they, it seems like you just scroll through the attorneys and you scroll through and there's pages of them. And then you see somebody who has more of, I'm going to call it a boutique law firm, where maybe there's, one attorney or maybe two attorneys and maybe one paralegal, and they're really devoted to family law. So can you just maybe share a little bit? Not that one is all good and one is all bad, there's good and bad and everything, but what can people expect as a different experience when because you've been in both. What do you think is the difference in the experience for the client?
Yeah, sure. So I think, after, like I said, 20 years in a large national law firm, I think the difference is that, with a larger firm, you can expect higher billing rates, certainly. For some people, that may not matter, but that's a reality. Definitely that you may be passed around a bit more. One of the benefits, or not a benefit, depending on your situation, is that, you go on and you can see that there's several people in the practice group that can help you. But you may, generally I find that people come to me for me. Even when I was at a very large firm, they weren't coming because of the firm name. They came because somebody had recommended them, or they read something about me or whatnot, and they felt like I would be a good person to work with them and our personalities would match. So when you're, if that's the way that you're going to choose your lawyer, in addition to their capabilities, of course, if you go to a larger firm and that person isn't available for whatever reason, you may be passed on to somebody else, and you may not have a say in that, and you may not feel that same way about that person. But, what we know is that the more you switch lawyers, it's not really a great look for you. And so people who are savvy to that information feel like they have to stay with their current attorney because they don't want it to be held against them that they've made a switch to a different attorney. So But for some people, that's a benefit, right? Should there be, they don't mind that they have other people working on it.
Right.
There is a benefit to the fact that if you have multi-layered attorneys in a practice, that, if the firm is doing things what I consider the right way, is that they are structuring your case so that a partner or somebody at a higher billing rate isn't necessarily doing all of the work. You're saving some money, and you're having somebody else who can do that, who's, a junior attorney, as well as you'll have two people available. Should your main point of contact, not be available, you'll always know somebody else and they can answer your question, and you're not just sitting around waiting for somebody to get back to you.
Right.
So when I started Fava Law, I knew that I had to have other attorneys for that reason, because I can't be in all places at one time. And at least I know that there's somebody who's been trained by me, who follows, kind of my mentality as far as the practice goes, who, I think has the right legal skills to be a part of the team that can help somebody should I not be available.
Yeah. I think that's really important. And so thank you for clarifying that, because, obviously there's things that everybody needs to consider. And that's one of the first steps I often work with my clients on is, okay, well, how are you going to hire a professional, and what do you need? Do you need that one-on-one, or do you want to have the big legal team? Always with the proviso that the big legal team, you may be paying for an hour of all four of those attorneys' time sitting at that table. That's a pretty expensive hour.
Yes,
time.
it is.
And so you just have.
And it's not necessarily necessary.
Right.
It's just kind of when you're in that model, it's just, I hate to say it's just what's done, but it is more of the norm than not the norm.
Sure.
And I think that sometimes we fall into patterns in all professions, that we operate at a certain level without necessarily always giving it the thought
Right.
that it maybe it deserves,
Right.
unfortunately. So I think that, and I think the other important part is, regardless of the size of your firm, right, you want to ask whoever your potential representation may be, questions about, do they practice in the county where you live in, right? Like, do they know the players there? Do they practice other things other than family law? Nowadays, the practice of law has become very specific. It's not like when maybe, let's say, pretend my father was an attorney. There was a lot more general practitioners, and they did a little bit of criminal, and they did some will planning, and they could appear in family court. It's not like that anymore.
Right.
By and large, you really have to have a focus, a practice specialty area that you do, because things change so quickly and so often. On all levels, county levels, state levels, national levels, the information exchange is so much faster, as we know with the internet, that you really can't be the jack of all trades. It's impossible to do that, I think, for
Right.
many people. So, asking questions like that, asking them, have they been in a courtroom? Have they tried a case? You'd be surprised at how many lawyers there are that don't litigate, that they don't go into court. They've never tried a case. They don't do domestic violence trials, and you don't want to be finding that out as you're in a position where, oh Lord, this is happening, and they say to you, oh, sorry, I don't do that. You have
Right.
to, you can go here or there. You're just making sure of that. And then what I also say is personality matching is, I think, super important for me as the attorney. I'm going to be the person that you may share things with that you haven't told, your best friend or your sister or brother. I need to know that you're telling me the truth, and you need to feel comfortable that I'm listening to you, and that I'm processing the information, and that I'm here to guide you forward in the way that needs to be. So, if you want somebody who's going to be super aggressive, are they going to be able to take that position? Do you want somebody who can be balanced, who, when it's time to be aggressive, they can do so, but they also know when to step back and say, listen, we need to take a different approach here because this isn't working. Not one size fits all. And I think that, especially in family law, where it's very emotionally driven, I would say to anybody looking for an attorney, you might feel this way now, but you may not feel this way in 6 months after you've spent $50,000, right? So think about the versatility of the attorney that you're working with, because I think
Sure.
that that's an important consideration.
Yeah, and we've covered this a couple of times on the podcast, but the more aggressive the attorney, typically the more motions are going to be filed. That's more money it's going to cost you. That's just the way it is. Now, you may not have a choice because perhaps your partner you already know is going to be high conflict. They've got a habit or a pattern of this kind of behavior. And so you may have to gear up with an attorney that's going to be able to fight fire with fire, for lack of a better word. But
Sure.
I've also talked to a lot of attorneys who say, well, sometimes having the cool level head in the room is going to be beneficial. So,
Correct.
and we could probably talk all day about how to choose an attorney, but I do want to talk to you about one of the areas I know you focus on. And this is an area I really think where there's so much misinformation, or everybody bases it on what happened in great Aunt Millie's divorce in 1960, and that is alimony. Can you talk a little bit about changing trends in alimony? Because I sometimes warn my clients about this, that idea of permanent alimony is pretty much a dinosaur, except for unless there's special situations where a person could not be employed after the divorce. Can you talk a little bit about that, Sandra, if you wouldn't mind?
Absolutely. So, you said it better than I would have said it, right? Alimony is an evolution of a legal theory, right? The genesis, if you will, of alimony was really about people not becoming wardens of the state not having to, having divorced and largely women who had not been in the workforce or who had no transferable skills outside of their home to have to go on welfare, and then becoming a problem that the state would have to address through taxpayers. So that's really the genesis of alimony. And now, as times have changed and we have two-income households, much more common than before, we have women who out-earn men, more common than before, alimony has evolved over time. And so in the state of New Jersey, we are one of the states that no longer has what was once considered permanent alimony. And comparing your divorce to anyone else's, whether it's Aunt Millie's from the 60s or your neighbor who did it last year, is the absolute wrong thing to do. And it is so common that people will say to me, but my cousin got divorced, my hairdresser got divorced, they got this, they got that. How come I don't have that? My response is, with any divorce, think of it as a fingerprint. No two are alike. Even one minor fact difference can be a huge game changer in the outcome of your case, or how the law is applied to your situation. And you have to really be aware of that from the beginning. I think, managing client expectations for lawyers has to be something that we do a better job at, and it's something that I try to focus on. I'm not selling somebody, a promise that I know is never going to be fulfilled, because, the outcome of that is worse for me, I think. And I'm always amazed when other attorneys do that, but it does happen. So, permanent alimony in New Jersey no longer exists. We now have what's called open durational alimony. So if you've been married for 12 years or longer, you are a candidate for open durational alimony, but it cannot exceed the length of your actual marriage term unless, as you said, there are exceptional circumstances, extenuating circumstances. One of those things being if you're disabled or you have some sort of health condition as the recipient of alimony. Another thing is that if you have a child who can never function on their own and you're going to be that child's sole caretaker, that may put you in a position for, a longer duration than the term of your marriage. Other changes in alimony is that, a couple of years ago in 2018, the federal tax code changed and made alimony no longer tax deductible or taxable to the recipient. And so some states thereafter, or even before that, had an alimony calculator where you would plug in certain facts and it would spit out a number. New Jersey toyed with that idea, but we ultimately decided that we were not going to do that and continue to have statutory factors that are considered. But those factors were even revised to say that, like, no party should have a better lifestyle standard than the other party, because one of the things you hear about very often is the marital standard of living. Well, this was my marital standard of living. And the reality, and why I dislike that term of art, is that when you are taking one income, let's say, for example, and now splitting that amongst two households, it is impossible, many situations, for both people to have the exact same standard of living that they enjoyed when they were one family unit in one household.
Yeah.
Especially in states like New Jersey, New York, California, where we are, our coastal states tend to be the more expensive to live in.
Right.
It's just not a reasonable things. Now, if you're talking about people who have multi-millions, the high net worth cases, then it's a little bit easier to achieve, of course, because the more you have, the easier it is. But when you're not in those situations, you have to be realistic about what that means to you, for
Yeah.
you, in your planning, right? And sometimes people, kind of think, well, we have so much in assets, we have a lot of savings, we have a lot in stock, we have a lot in retirement, right? But understanding the tax complications or scenarios if you access those types of funds, right? Which may change your day-to-day living as well. So, making sure that you have somebody, and this goes back to who you work with, to go back is, do you have somebody who understands those pieces? Do you have somebody who can help you with an analysis, or works with forensic accountants if there's a business, and we're talking about cash flow versus if somebody's a W-2 employee, what's on that W-2 and that tax return is all that's there to be distributed. But oftentimes if somebody is self-employed, and depending on the type of business, it might not just be what's on a tax return or on a K-1.
Sure.
There may be perquisites that are being passed through the business that on a tax return are totally legitimate. But when you're trying to figure out cash flow for purposes of alimony or even child support, you have to dig a little bit deeper and understand what's happening here. So alimony can become very complicated, both in mindset and the actual facts that apply to everybody's situation. And you have to make sure that you're really understanding that, and you can't walk in thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to have this because this is what I've always have.
Right. So thank you for that. And thank you for giving that level of detail, because, sometimes I do believe that a lot of times people, the attorney says, well, there's a fairly good chance that you will qualify for alimony. And then people just go, oh, that means big bucks,
Yes.
And then they don't realize that alimony, like I know there's several states or several people that I work with in different jurisdictions. So in the United States, Canada, and even in Europe, where the alimony is limited to half the duration of the marriage. So, if you're married, and you have to be married for a set number of years, 10, 12, 15, and then you're only going to get alimony for a maximum of half of that amount. So, and if you happen to get back to, into the dating scene, and in some states, even if you start living with somebody without even legally marrying them, that terminates your alimony. So you've really got to know what this is. And that's we're talking to, the do-it-yourself divorce is great if you've got no assets, no savings, and you've got total trust with each other. God bless you, and just get out there and go do it on your own. But if that's typically not, it may look like that. And then you get into the divorce and people start getting upset and tempers get a little flared. And all of a sudden that collaborative, or that amicable relationship just kind of falls to the side for a while.
Yeah. Right.
So,
because when you think about it, people who are getting divorced are generally, not happy, right? Or at least one of them isn't happy. That's why this is happening. And so you need to have full transparency to do something like, there's a lot of alternative dispute resolution, which can be great. It can save people lots of money and time. But when people come to me and they say, hey, I definitely want to do mediation, I've done my research, I think, this is what I want to do. And then I start asking questions like, well, do you have full access to all of your financial information? Is there transparency in your relationship when it comes to that? No, well, I don't think mediation is definitely the right choice yet. And what people also fail to realize is you can turn to alternate dispute like a mediation or an arbitration at any point during the process, but you have to have the tools in your toolbox to do that. Because if you go to, collaborative divorce or mediation, and all of a sudden you find out something that you never even knew, your level of trust is going to be, really low. And you need to have a pretty calm level of trust, a pretty decent level of trust, to go through those processes, because remember, it's completely voluntary. So once somebody's trust has been broken, they can walk away, and it's also completely confidential. So you cannot turn to a judge and say, well, in mediation, judge, they were willing to do X, Y, and Z, and now we're here and they're not doing that anymore. The judge can't hear it. It's, it's a lot of la, because otherwise people wouldn't be so inclined to throw out different proposals or be creative in their settlement positions in mediation if they knew that those would be held against them should it not work.
Right.
So you really have to make sure, it's a wonderful idea, especially emotionally. You're so exhausted emotionally and there's a point where I think at least one, if not both people reach where they just want out. I call it litigation fatigue.
Yeah.
That people who have actually gone through the process, they're tired of writing the checks, they're tired of arguing, they're tired of having to think about this. We get it. I get it 100%, but you have to make sure you have some of those tools in your toolbox if you're going to walk into a position where you're trying to negotiate, because you don't know what are you there to do. You can't advocate for yourself, or neither can your attorney if you're going to mediation with an attorney. They can't even advocate for you if they don't have the information to say, okay, I have a question about this transaction, or what does this mean? Or, how come you got paid this way this year, but it didn't work out that way that year? Things like that.
Right. Absolutely. Sandra, we could go on and on for forever. I love this conversation. And we're going to definitely talk about, after we get off the air, talk about having you back on and do some of this stuff maybe later on in the year. But you shared a wealth of information for people thinking about hiring an attorney, whether or not, they're going to potentially, or what their alimony might realistically look like, and also about some of the pros and cons of maybe using the mediation process. Of all of this stuff that you have talked about, what's the one thought you want people to keep kind of top of mind when they stop listening and go on about their busy day?
I think, to me, the most important takeaway that I would love your listeners to have is really be thoughtful in who you choose as an attorney. Please don't just go with a recommendation. I recommend people interview at least 2, if not 3 or more attorneys, just to get a sense of style and personality and really dig deeper in asking those questions. I think it's important as attorneys that we provide resources and information for people. So if you are in a position where you feel like you're not necessarily sure on your own, working with a divorce coach, I think, is a really helpful tool. Again, these are things that you can do for the entire process. You can use somebody to help you figure out who you should work with, initially, and then come back to them later, should you have a trial or something like that. Understanding and being realistic about what your divorce is going to be like is really important to help you make those choices, because you may want it to be easy and nice and friendly. But if you have a high conflict spouse, or if you're dealing with somebody who's got a, mental health or a substance abuse problem, or just a personality, it's not going to happen. And you have to really be realistic about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can only control yourself in the divorce process. That's all you have control over. Sandra, if people want to find out more, if they now you practice law in New Jersey, so you're not able to work to legally represent people outside of that state. But if you're in New Jersey and you're interested in talking to Sandra and finding out more about what she does, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Sure. So obviously I have a website, favalawnj.com. You can follow me on social media. We have a Twitter, Divorce New Jersey Law. We have Instagram, which is Fava Law. So it's at Fava Law, as well as I have a personal Facebook business page. So I'm constantly posting resources. I'll probably share this interview when it comes out, things like that. Other tips, on my website, we have my own blog, podcast, things like that, that I've written over the course of my 20+ year career that you can go into. So now you have a face to go with the name. You can, if you feel comfortable, you have somebody that you can reach out to. And while I only practice in the state of New Jersey, because of my career being at a bigger firm, I do have lots of contacts all over. So, I'm happy if somebody needs a resource somewhere else to try to help out.
Oh, thank you. That is very kind of you because it can be very intimidating, even reaching out to an attorney. So you're right. Once people have heard you and seen you and gone and looked at your website and stuff, they form kind of a sense of, okay, Sandra's a great person. I can call up and ask her this question. I'm not going to feel like overwhelmed with having to talk to a professional. So Sandra, thank you for all you do. And thanks for being here and sharing all your wisdom and insight.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
And thank you for listening in to this episode of The D Shift. And don't forget to tune in again next week. Thanks for listening and supporting the D Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.